Hello, welcome to Prime Lenses. I'm Ian. Each week, I speak with a guest about 3 lenses that have meant something to them on their photographic journey. And my guest this week is Tommy Gakuen-Wan. Tommy is a Scottish photographer based in Glasgow, who I struck up a conversation with on social media a few years ago when he picked up a Ricoh GR3 and foolishly replied to my messages about it. We've spoken over the years about all sorts of stuff, and I really admire his work in the arts and theatre. He's even photographed some comedy greats as well. He recently featured in some work himself, in fact, sharing his broad shoulders for the poster of a play that's going on in Glasgow right now. He speaks to me not only as a photographer, but also as a person who's aware of what they need to do great creative work and self-care as well as working hard. He's got the balance right, I think, which is something we touch on in the conversation. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation with a great working photographer in Scotland. Here's Tommy. How's 2025 kicking off for you then? You were away at the start, weren't you?
Yep, I usually go away in January, partly because work is often very quiet in January, and it's also cold and miserable here in Scotland, so it's a good time to be away. So I went to Hong Kong. That's the first time I'd been back there since before COVID, and it was great. Yeah, I had a wonderful time.
No, it looked amazing. I was very jealous. You were getting chatted up by old ladies in the park as well, which is always nice. It's funny because I've enjoyed your photography for years, but I also really enjoy seeing like your sort of the way you build exercise and physicality and stuff into your life as well. Like you feel like someone who knows what they need in order to kind of be themselves and to center yourself. And so you kind of like, to follow you on social media is to also get a good insight into that. And I think I wanted to kind of touch on that.
Having identified the things that I need to sort of center myself, as you put it, or just to be a balanced sort of individual. That's fairly recent, I would say. And of course, the main thing with that is exercise and fitness. That's only been something I've really gotten into in the past few years. But yeah, I mean, the way in which that is a part of my sort of Instagram or whatever. I mean, that's always been the case. My first sort of social media, I suppose, was Flickr, and I never had a Flickr for my personal life and a Flickr for my professional life. They were always just the same thing, and that's sort of carried on through to Instagram as well. I have thought about whether or not I should set up a dedicated Instagram for my photography or for whatever, but no, it suits me just to keep everything in one place.
I do the same. Like the podcast could have like a Prime Lenses pod Instagram and stuff, but then you've got 2 things, and then you're posting to the wrong place, and also I feel like doing increasingly, maybe this is a very kind of 2020s kind of version of this. People used to follow outlets, and now they kind of follow individuals in that way that people can leave a publication, and then actually people will follow them as an individual. So in the last couple of years, so many journalists, they moved to Substack or whatever. And so I think actually building something around you as an individual and people understanding who you are, I think is increasingly just what people expect, I guess. And then it's yours, and you're taking it with you, even if you work for someone else for a bit,
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting take on that. I hadn't really considered that aspect before about the fact that people will follow a person rather than an outlet. I mean, I suppose in some ways it can be maybe limiting because people obviously follow an outlet for a specific purpose, whereas a person is a bit more wide ranging in their interests maybe than that. But I mean, I've never obviously it's nice to have people follow you, isn't it? But I've never really chased it. That's not really people can follow me if they like what I'm doing, and if they don't, then don't. I'm not gonna really change what I'm up to in order to get some followers.
Same. I've resolutely not looked at the stats for the podcast. Don't actually know how many people are listening. I think I get enough email and I get enough messages to know that it's some, but I don't email every podcast I listen to every week to go, still doing a good job. Keep it up. And so, I have a rough idea from some RSS number that I can't avoid. when I log into Squarespace. But apart from that, like, I don't really know, and I don't want to know, because what number would be, like, what's the number? Like, I don't know.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what's the point? If you chase that, then you're probably not making the things that you want to make. I was talking to George Holden, who makes stuff on YouTube. I was talking to him about, like, stuff, because we're going to catch up in London in a couple of weeks, and he was saying, like, yeah, you do this, and then you do that, and then the AdSense and the thing, and it's like, your business model is just so dependent on someone else's in a way that I'm not comfortable with. Like, they'll just change it, you know. One day they'll change YouTube to be called the YouTube of America, and then you're like, I don't know how I feel about that. And then too late, your income is entirely dependent on this thing, and then you're like, you compromise on that, and then, you know, where does it stop, you know? So if January kind of starts out a bit slower for you as a photographer, because most of what I'm assuming this, and it might be wrong, a lot of what I see you photograph is performing arts, like performances or stuff for posters for that sort of thing, and theatre. Yeah. Was that a conscious choice, or was that something that just sort of started to come your way?
I would, it was actually something more that just sort of started to come my way. I mean, when I was at university, or when I graduated and had decided to try and make a career of photography, I knew I was interested in photographing people. Things like landscapes and so on weren't of much interest to me, at least professionally, and I suppose artistically as well. But or even if not so much, they're not of interest, but it's not what I'm very good at. I didn't consider myself to be I didn't think that was going to be a realistic professional avenue for me. But yes, a lot of my friends at that time were aspiring actors or directors. I had some involvement with student theatre while I was at university. So as those people began to embark on their professional journey and they needed photographs, they came to me because they knew me as socially, maybe just simply as that guy with the camera. And it kind of went from there. And through them, I met other people. And I was very lucky to meet the theatre maker Stuart Lang, who became something of a mentor to me over the years, and who asked me to photograph one of his shows, and this was for Scottish Opera. And then, although I wasn't photographing officially for Scottish Opera, it was just a show that he was doing for Scottish Opera. But then when Scottish Opera saw the pictures that I'd taken of that show, I started to get some work for them. And so I was really sort of, you know, very lucky to get a foot in the door kind of at the top. I mean, Scottish Opera, National Theatre Scotland, Scottish Ballet, those are the national companies. So it kind of just went from there. And that continues theatre in particular to be my sort of bread and butter, classical music. And then obviously during COVID, when there was no live performance to be had, I started to get some work in film and television because those industries were still producing, albeit under strictly regulated circumstances. And that sort of kept up a bit. I continued to do a bit of work in that industry as well.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Was that when you photographed, I think I saw you photograph Alan Cumming when he was doing some stuff on TV, or was that a theatre thing? I can't remember. I thought that was a TV one.
Yeah, I can't remember what my first professional encounter with Alan Cumming was. I think it might have been, I don't remember actually. But yeah, I photographed him in context of both theatre and film and TV. And then we have and through that we're friends as well. So
yeah. And did you, when you mentioned you were studying, did you study in Glasgow? Because you're very Glasgow.
Yes,
now.
I studied English Lit at Glasgow Uni.
I did Scots Lit.
Oh, right, okay.
At Glasgow. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what years were you there?
I was there 98 to 2004.
Okay, so there was a tiny bit of crossover. I was there 2003 to 2007.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
No, it was good. I chose Scots Lit because I went to do language and I was really bad at English language, especially the phonics and stuff. I just could not get my head around it at all. And then I was early on. I took Scots Lit as one of the as a module sort of, I think in my first year. And Chris, I can't remember his surname, but Chris, who headed up the Scots Lit department at the time, and was one of the kind of the founders of the subject,
Hmm.
was in our first lecture. Might have been over in the Boydore back in the day. It was squirreled
Yeah,
away in a
yeah.
corner somewhere. And we started the lecture. I'd run in. I was a bit late, and he went and he was like, "What's the name of Harrison Ford's character in Star Wars?" And I was like, "Okay." And basically, he was basically saying that like the Red Gauntlet story and the kind of a lot of westerns and things like that, like it all traces back to books like Red Gauntlet. And to Scott's
Sure.
Lit, and to have that
Right.
for the
Wow.
origin, and so it was things like that, and the fact that Jekyll and Hyde being Scottish, and
Yeah, of course.
Frankenstein, we claim that one as ours. And so, yeah, it was just wonderful to kind of realize there was this opportunity to study a language and study literature in a place where this was completely new. No, there weren't any right and wrong
Yeah.
answers. There wasn't an agreed way of writing the language in a lot of cases. So you would read something by one person, and they were spelling the same word differently, and so that was really
Hmm.
exciting to
Hmm.
me. And also the rich history of theatre and poetry and stuff like that at times when England had banned certain types of performance and things like that. So it was a
Mm.
really interesting mix. And I was like, I can be one of 70 people studying my honours in Scots Lit, or it could be one of hundreds, it felt like, in the English
Yeah.
Lit department. And I may as well do something much more interesting. And so it's quite good. It's funny. It's come up at work recently because we're working video games, but we're doing something that has a kind of Scottish connection. So it's like, oh, this is brilliant. I get to talk about the stuff that I studied and why it matters and things.
Great.
So yeah, very
Oh,
cool.
fascinating.
Yeah, it was a cool department. Oh, that's so cool. So 2007. So then you came straight out from there. Was photography the thing that you were definitely going to pick up straight away, or were you just interested in photography and then it kind of became your career?
Yeah, I mean, it was a hobby when I was a student, or I mean, probably more accurately described as an obsession, really, because I mean, I was always taking pictures. I never went anywhere without a camera. But when I was in second year, I won a place on a student exchange run by the British Council and the university to Pakistan. And when I got back and the British Council and the university saw the pictures that I'd taken there, I started to get a bit of paid work from them. So that was the first sort of instance in which I imagined that, it might be possible to make a career out of this. Um, and I worked my summer job when I was a student was in a law firm. Um, Basically just sort of doing sort of quite menial tasks and then eventually typing. But yes, so I was offered a traineeship at this law firm when I was graduating. I think this is back. I think now you have to have a law degree to be a lawyer in
Right.
Scotland, but I think back then you didn't.
Mm,
Um, but anyway, I turned it down because I wanted to pursue photography.
yeah.
Something that I didn't tell my parents for many years after. I think they would. I don't think they would have been very happy with that decision. But everything's worked out. So yeah, that was my sort of path. Although I did for a year after I graduated, I continued to work in a law office, sort of 3 days a week, um, while yeah, until they let me go actually, which was probably a good thing. So then it gave me a bit more of an impetus to
Mm.
really develop my freelance professional life.
Yeah, sometimes you need that nudge, that thing that pushes you over the edge, especially if you know
Yeah.
that you wouldn't necessarily have the support of family. I was going to ask about how supportive family were it's because that's the classic thing, isn't it? If your family worry, if you're going into the arts,
Of course. Yeah,
like my
yeah,
sister went into fashion design, and there was lots of family kind of like, okay,
yeah.
are you sure?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't have any children, but I don't know how I'd respond if they wanted to go into the arts.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm quite surprised at how supportive I mean, I was the first person in my family to go to university for a
right.
long, long time, I think. So just the fact that I had done that was a sort of big achievement. So I was they weren't that fussed what I studied, which is kind of surprising actually, because my dad is Chinese and, there's obviously, I mean, I was going to say it's a stereotype, but it's also really quite true in my experience. Of other people, everyone I know that's Chinese, but less so with me. My dad was not under any pressure to study medicine or accounting or
Mm.
engineering or anything like that. they were just happy that I went to university. I think they probably would have exerted some soft pressure if they'd known I
Yeah.
had been offered a law traineeship, say. But yeah, but they were generally quite supportive.
I suppose once they start to see, I've spoken to some folks on the podcast who had like an influential uncle or
Mm,
like another family member who shared the passion and shared their kind of
hmm.
love of something creative, who was kind of, I suppose, the person the family turned to and goes, is this good? Is the stuff he's doing good? And because like my
Right,
my
yeah, yeah.
nephew took up photography when he was very young, and it was my dad who was actually he was like a bit of a photojournalist and stuff, who looked at his photos and was like, these are really good. Like, don't worry, he should do this.
Hmm.
And actually, funnily enough, he's gone into software engineering now, and he's different, but his
Right,
early
okay.
20s, and he was a really good photographer. For he could have taken it up, but it would have he now does fancy typing for a living. It's a different world.
Yeah.
Just
I think part of the difficulty for, my parents and maybe a lot of people is that they don't really understand what it is that, I mean, everyone knows what photography is, yes, but how that works in a professional context, or they maybe have quite a narrow understanding of what that might possibly be. Um, so for example, I remember a time when I was walking with my dad in Glasgow, and we walked past a billboard that had one of my pictures on it, and I said, "Oh, Dad, I took that." And he sort of, it took him quite a while to understand what I meant. He was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "That picture on that billboard, I took it." And he was like, what do you mean you took it?" And I said, "That's what I do. That's my job. I take that as one of them." And then he was like, "Wow, wow," and taking pictures of it on his phone, and sort of like, but it's funny that it took it needed to have something really tangible to understand what it is that I do.
that must be quite a cool feeling. I was going to ask about whether or not the work you do every day and day and out has diminished your love, because you were saying that you were always obsessed and you were the person with the camera, and like similarly,
Hmm.
one does not accidentally start a podcast about photography. Like it's
Right.
the
Yeah. Of
world
course. Of
the
course.
world is not looking for another guy that looks like me to sort of get a
Hmm.
microphone in front of him and go, let's talk about things. But has the work in it changed your relationship to it and how you feel about the hobby? Or
When I was young, yeah, I carried a camera everywhere and I was always taking photographs. And that probably that probably helped me to get work, but that's not why I did it. Really was just driven by a kind of passion, which then as I started to get busy with work, if you've been taking photographs all day at work, then and then you're going out that evening, maybe I don't take the camera anymore. Or if I do, it doesn't see quite as much action. And I don't know if that's just a result of that, or it might just be aging.
yeah,
And a kind of maybe a kind of laziness. A lot of it is I don't want to be bothered carrying a camera
yeah,
around with me, which is actually where the Ricoh comes in so handy, because that
mm,
literally does fit in a pocket. Um, but it's not quite as versatile, particularly in say low light
yeah.
environments, as carrying an SLR around. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just I mean, because I can still get when I'm taking photographs, I'm still as passionate and worked up.
Mm.
It's just maybe I'm sort of better at just putting it to the side and compartmentalizing that if it doesn't need to be all the time.
Yeah, I,
Uh,
I remember when you got the Rico. I remember seeing what was lovely about seeing your photos, and I think I may have messaged you about this at the time, because it's a couple of years ago now. You seemed to be at play again in a way that was really lovely, and
right, sure.
suddenly there was a sort of a flurry of stuff that was very imperfect, because you had this point and shoot, and I think it
Hmm.
was in your hand. You were on a train, and you were just I remember you just like shots out the window, shots of friends,
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
house you were all staying in and stuff, and it was just that it's wonderful to see a creative person whose work you enjoy and admire anyway, but then to see them at play again is really lovely, because I think people like you make something like that camera sing, and that's why I get so excited about
Oh,
that
thank
thing
you.
as a creative tool. Is because you give it to different people and they make stuff look, they make it look fantastic, and they make incredible memories with their friends and their family with it. But also, like, in the hands of an operator, that's what's so exciting about that thing. Is like, yeah, you could give that camera to anyone and it will help them to take a perfectly acceptable photo. But you give it to someone who knows what they're doing, and it's just great.
It's an unusual, the way it works is quite unusual, and it's sort of not a camera that I recommend to many people, to be honest. because I think you kind of do have to know what you're doing with it. But if you do know what you're doing, then yeah, I think it can be a really rewarding piece of kit.
Yeah, I wish it had a flash though. That little one, just this
Yeah,
one
I think you
thing.
can get an external one that you attach, which is not too like bulky or anything, but I haven't used it. But yeah, I think that would be great. I might actually look into to acquiring one of those. I think it'd be fun.
It's an interesting thing because the point and shoot is back in a big way. That like the big companies are starting to do it,
Definitely.
and Leica brought out a new Deluxe, which is basically the old Deluxe again, but this time it comes in a box with a flash, and it was just quite an interesting little thing of like, yeah, that everyone's noticing that like it was on the calculation a bit like that Fight Club calculation of like what's cheaper, the recall or the court case, and it's sort of they've
Right.
looked at it and gone, what's cheaper? Do we just re-engineer this to include a flash, or do we just put one
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
box? And we'll just put one in the box. Turns out that was the path of least resistance, especially for Leica money. But yeah, no, I'm glad point and shoots are back. I think it's a thing we missed because that's where I started with film.
Yeah, I think it makes sense because I mean the number of people who uh say have asked me over the years for advice on which digital SLR they should buy, and then I meet up with them sometime later and ask how they're getting on with it. And they say it's just sitting in a drawer because nobody can really be bothered actually with all that faff of a DSLR. Maybe they bring it out when they go on holiday somewhere, but the rest of the time it doesn't. Whereas a point and shoot is so versatile. But then of course, and it's great actually because it means that we're seeing because for a while there didn't seem to be much point in owning a point and shoot because phones were so good. So it's nice that if point and shoots are being developed technologically as well.
Well, it certainly gets away from that problem because I don't know if you've like felt nostalgic ever and tried to go back and buy an old camera, but buying old cameras at the moment, like people have taken all the fun out of old cameras. Like the prices on eBay are absurd.
Is that right? Wow,
It's
I'm surprised.
the digicam's a thing, and it's all. I'm going to blame my friend Ali, who she does a YouTube channel about it, the 1 month 2 cameras channel on YouTube, where she goes and reviews older cameras historically. And so what happens is
Okay.
Ali rediscovers a camera that she can pick up on eBay for like $50. She takes really,
Yeah.
really great photos because she's an operator and she knows what she's doing. And then
Yeah,
suddenly
of
the price
course.
goes. And so it's I was, for years, I was trailing her on YouTube and it was like just like 48 hours too late. And then suddenly the prices have gone
Yeah,
up or you can't
yeah.
get hold of them. We managed to get hold
Wow.
of one for my eldest son because he's hit the limits of his point and shoot and he wants a better one. And so
Hmm.
I had my first SLR was a D40 Nikon, and so we managed to get one on eBay for 60 quid that looks like it's in good nick and it's got the box and everything. But like that, I never get a deal like that. Like normally,
Yeah, amazing.
you know, 12-year-old Fuji's that cost like 400 quid.
Really.
Yeah, it's like it's nearly a GR. Like you could buy a new camera
Mm.
for that, like,
Hmm.
but everyone wants their CCD sensor for the vibes.
Hmm.
First, did you start with film or were you kind of,
No, I started in digital. I mean, the first one was when I was this was there would have been like the year 2000 or maybe even 1999, and it was a free gift that came with a PC that my parents had bought, and I think it was zero point 0.3 megapixels. I mean, this thing was really primitive, really early, and but it was enough to give me just the joy of taking photographs. And then it went on from there, just sort of going up through various different point and shoots. I think I still have one. I mean, it doesn't work anymore, but I kept it partly because I just love the aesthetic of it. It's a Fuji Finepix.
oh yeah,
Um,
there it is.
yeah, one of these. I love this camera.
Yeah.
So it was through stuff like that, and then those sort of slightly bulkier ones that are more like cubes, and they had the sort of big optical zooms or digital zooms even. I think both. Um, and yeah, my first DSLR was a Nikon D70.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
So yeah, that was when I sort of started to get serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those Nikons were great. I really loved them. I made my decision to go Nikon versus Canon based on the Wildlife Photographer of the Year award that year. I was in
Okay.
London and I went to the exhibition and there were more nominated photos with Nikon than Canon, and so I was like, fine,
Okay, there you go. Scientific experiment.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I was looking into getting one, I think the D70 was quite new and it was just it had rave reviews, it was sort of like a new era of DSLR. So that's the one I got, and I had no complaints with Nikon, so I've just been with them ever since. I mean, I have, yeah. I think there was a time quite recently when a lot of people were sort of migrating to Sony, but then Nikon seems to have sort of caught up on its mirrorless game. So again, I'm still with them.
I love the Nikon stuff. I like the look of the ZF and things like that. The way they seem to be like charting a course for themselves with this kind of like semi-vintage,
Mm.
semi-not sort of camera system now. Are you quite dispassionate about your gear in that way? Like, because these things are, especially now they're for your job, like they're just a creative tool at the end of the day, and you could probably turn your hand to just about anything. So are you fairly, with the exception of those early ones, which I think it's easy to feel nostalgic about the older ones.
Of course, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, but absolutely, that's true. To me, it's just a camera, just a tool, and I don't even spend a great deal of time and effort sort of keeping up with new developments, except for when it's time for me to go and get one, and then I say, well, which one is going to suit my purpose best? Yeah, and that's that's really the extent of it. It's just a means to an end for me, and I feel sort of the same about quite a lot of the process in general. So I'm not really fussed about shooting with film, or about going into dark rooms or anything like that. Yeah, it's really just about the end result for me.
Do you print? Is there much call for you to print stuff? Because you're seeing a lot of your work in print. So quite often when I talk to folks, I get to the topic of like, are you printing stuff? And they sort of either yes, it's a really big deal to them and they print all the time, or kind of no, they look at everything and there's often not an in between. But your commercial work presumably so often ends up in print, in programs, on posters, writ large,
Yeah.
sides of buses. So does that kind of diminish your need to see, because you're kind of seeing some of it blown up?
Yeah, yeah, it's always sort of quite nice to see that. I suppose there's a difference though between the sort of quality that you're going to get from a poster that you see on the tube, which is obviously printed en masse, and a high quality sort of exhibition print. Um, I don't exhibit. Oh, I used to exhibit a bit, but I haven't done properly for a long time. So I have quite a lot of. I have a lot of fair bit of prints, and then there are some things that I'll get printed, maybe just for for my own, to put up in my own flat, for example. Um, and it is really lovely actually to see your work printed well, and especially large as well. It does have a special kind of impact, I think.
So do you kind of, I was going to ask about printing your stuff around your house. Do personal projects kind of form much of your, do you have like, I'm obviously working day to day and I'm doing stuff for clients, but I have this little side project that I'm pursuing that's kind of for myself, or is it all
I mean,
commercial?
occasionally things like that will come up, but not so much because I sort of, and maybe it would be useful to sort of delineate it better, more narrowly into these kinds of projects. But generally, I'm just I have a small camera and I'll just be taking pictures sort of as and when, quite often. So I suppose the sort of wider the big wide project is basically just a document of my personal life, of my friendships and all this kind of thing. As I say, it might be that I'd get something more out of it if I were to sort of try and um, create a narrative that is a bit more exclusive. Um,
I've started sticking stuff in notebooks these days. Like that's my, rather than give myself the pressure of trying to create a project. Because the thing is, if you work full time, you have family commitments and stuff going on, and like then to give yourself the extra pressure of, now I'm going to make a book and it's going to make sense and there's going to be a beginning and a middle and an end and a story, seems like a lot to kind of put together. So
yeah.
I kind of took it on myself. I was like, so I literally, it's notebooks and pictures stuck in, or photos from
Oh,
previous
nice.
guests. Yeah, an actual cow. That's Declan, the sky, the sky postman took that one. Did you see his news story last year?
No.
Really cool news story. Declan, very briefly, he's a previous guest of the show, so I'm sort of advertising. But he takes loads of photos on his round, going around Skye, because he's got this
Yeah.
stunning scenery there all the time. and he's a really great photographer, takes amazing photos, and got picked up by BBC News. A friend of his writes for the Gallic website, and then that got picked up by the main website, and then suddenly he was getting messages from people all over the world saying how much they liked his photos, and now he's selling postcards and things. It's quite fun. So I hit him up last year at the height of his kind of BBC News confused stardom, and he was just like, yeah, no, I'll have a chat to you about cameras, sure. But yeah, it's really lovely.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, really cool story. His pictures are mega as well, and now because he's a postman, he's selling his own postcards. He sees when people are sending his postcards around the world.
Of course,
that's really cool. Really. So he gets to empty a post box and go, oh look, there's one of mine. A bit like your moment, with your dad.
Yeah. I mean, another thing I maybe thinking about when it comes to what might be seen as a diminishing of passion, or the fact that I maybe take less photos in my personal life, or don't carry a camera quite as often as I used to. I think a lot of that has to do actually with what happened during COVID, which is that obviously most of my career is in the performing arts, and that was really just dead during COVID, and there was a real fear about what how the way in which it might come back, if ever. And at that time, I think I really did believe that my career was over, and sort of grieved for it in quite a healthy way, I think, because it meant that afterwards, when things did start to come back, I had, in that time or through the grieving process, I had managed to detach my professional success from my sort of identity. I think before that, they were really tied up in quite an unhealthy way, I think, and I think that's often the case for a lot of creative people, that if you are not succeeding professionally, it's because you're rubbish at it, or your work is shit, you're shit, and that can be a really unhealthy mindset, and it can extend to other sort of unpleasantness, because if you see friends in the same industry getting ahead, you can grow to resent them, and it's really not nice. And so I think that process that I went through during COVID meant that I no longer felt like that, and I probably did lose a bit of professional ambition. Actually, I sort of wasn't that fussed about um attaining certain levels of success. I thought, you know what, actually I found out what I need in my life, and as long as I can afford to have those things, I'm happy. And it meant that I I sort of stopped feeling a need to sort of prove anything to myself, I think. And I started to take photographs for the fun of it, and then maybe only for the fun of it. So I'll take it when I feel like it's going to be fun, and then I don't feel a pressure to take it when it's not going to be fun, if that makes sense. Through that process of reading my career and finding other things that made me happy, basically I discovered that there's a lot more to me than as someone who takes photos, which I think that I wasn't fully aware of, or allowed myself to become sort of trapped in this sort of self-image where all I was a photographer. Which if you're, if that's what you do for fun and it's what your job is, then I think that's quite easy to fall prey to.
Yes, I think I'm glad that you've come out of that with such a healthy perspective. I think that's really good. It's not guaranteed, because the impact on industries, my industry is still feeling it, is reeling from it. I think a bunch of people high up assumed no one would ever go outside ever again. And they were like, this is it. Games are it. This is the, this huge growth. And then, fast forward a few years, and suddenly hundreds of thousands of people worldwide over a couple of years are losing their job. And it's just because everyone overhired and assumed that the line would always go up. And it's like, well, people are going to want to go outside again at a certain point, it's so, especially once they can, get vaccinated against the thing and then start traveling. And it also turns out that running away from things like a plague is not a thing that human beings do, as it turns out. We run towards it like a moth to a flame for reasons that will baffle me until I die, I think. But we are where we are. So in terms of, now that you're through and you've got your gear and stuff, just to dapple a little bit of gear, and then I want to get back to like some interesting creative stuff. But what's your day-to-day setup like? Because I was talking to a guy I know, Joseph, a couple of weeks ago. It was last weekend's episode. He shoots a lot of theatre work in New York, and was talking about like for him, it's electronic shutters and long reach lenses that will, common or garden kind of 70 to 200s get him the coverage he needs so he can let the performance be and not get, interfere with it. How do you like to work in those spaces?
Um, I generally have two cameras. One will have a 24 to 70 on it, and the other will have a 70 or 80 to 200. Yeah, 70 to 200. And it depends on the sort of space where you're shooting. I think if you're shooting in a traditional proscenium arch, large auditorium, then you're probably, yep, going to be with the 70 to 200, most of the time. And as you say, that lets you have a distance and not interfere. But when it's a smaller space that lends itself to this, I do like to get close with the wider lens. It's sort of a risk. So, for example, if there's a key scene and I know I'm only going to be able to shoot it once, maybe it's something like a fight scene, say, or something with a fast moving, with a lot of physicality. The safe thing to do would be to go far back and shoot that with the long lens, um, because you're not going to miss anything. But on the other hand, I think if you do that, then you're just going to get the same shot as, or as close to the same shot as almost any other photographer given the same job. Whereas I think if you can go close to the action and a bit wider, then it's riskier, but the reward is higher, I think. I mean, some of my favorite shots that I've taken in theatre have been um, because I took that risk. And sometimes it doesn't pay off, sometimes it does. But then, of course, the more experienced you become at it, then the more you know how to deal with that kind of situation.
And I guess you know the theatres as well, like you know the layout. What do you mean
Yeah,
a few times?
exactly. Yeah, I mean, for example, one of my favourite theatres in Scotland to shoot in is Dundee Rep because it's not a traditional sort of here's the stage and here's the audience. There's a little bit of aspect of it being in the round, so you can get around the sides and you can get angles that you might not get in other theatres. The space makes a difference.
So it's funny you're mentioning there reminds me a lot of it's on my mind because the MotoGP season starts again soon. But a guy I had on the show called Rob, who photographs the MotoGP, talks about in the off season trying to like thinking ahead to what he'll do differently next season because his work is seasonal in a very predictable way. There's this
Hmm.
many races, there's this many. He knows where he's going. He's often going back to the same circuits and same
Yeah.
locations, so he can kind of get a sense at the same time of year, things like that. Do you use that kind of end of the year period once you've there's a lot coming into, I imagine, a season towards the end of the year, lots of performances, and then a bit of a slowdown maybe at the beginning of the
Hmm.
next year just to give everyone a break. Are you thinking about that in terms of like repeat customers or repeat things you'd like to do? And just do you give yourself some space there to kind of have ideas for like, oh, if I could go back and do that again, I'd do it like this? Like, is that how you're evolving your craft?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if it necessarily has to, if it works as seasonally as that. Obviously, in theatre there are seasons on, but I just mean for the way I respond to it. I think I'll be just sort of doing that at the end of every show. I'll look at what I have taken and think about what I might have done differently. It's um, it's interesting for me to look back on, which sometimes I do actually never don't necessarily make a point of doing this, but often when I'm looking for old files, I might just come across a folder from 10 years ago and have a look at a show that I shot then, or maybe I've been asked by a publication to find an image from a show from long ago, and yeah, I often I'm quite sort of uh, what's the word? I mean, is it ashamed even to put it too strongly? I mean, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, this work is awful. I wish I could shoot
Right.
this again now, which is probably quite a healthy position to be in if I feel like I'm constantly getting better. Um, but yeah, there's so many shows that I wish I could go back and shoot again. And I'll probably at the end of having done a bit of work just look back and yeah and think what I could have done differently and what I might do better next time.
It must be really fun to work, because presumably you're working with some of the same groups of folks as well. Because the theatre and TV production and stuff, more than a lot of industries, is kind of a coming together of some folks you've met before and worked together before, and some haven't. It's very much that kind of traveling circus. Bunch of folks come together. They expect to disband. Like, you don't necessarily get exactly the same makeup next time,
Oh, of
compared to other
course, yeah.
industries.
But I mean, there's it's in many ways quite a small community. I mean, there are certain directors that I work with a lot, and then of course they'll cast different actors each time,
Mm.
but then there's a lot of the same faces that you'll see again and again, and it's really it's part of what makes working in the theatre for me a lot more enjoyable than any of the other work that I do is the people that you meet and then I mean I'm a bit more it's not so much I don't drink as much anymore, but back in my sort of 20s and a lot of my 30s as well, there's a big drinking culture, around it as well, and it's a lot, a good times basically, a lot of good times.
Yeah, the Fringe takes me back to, like, I would, well, at university it was a lot of time spent down near the 13th Note and in the Union bars and stuff like that in the
Sure,
West
yeah.
End, and then yeah, over to the Fringe occasionally, which frightened me a little bit. It was a bit chaotic. I don't think I was ever like a proper good enough drinker. Like, these days, barely drink. It's just kind of just the way it seems to be happening. There's that thing that happens when you're a grown up and you, like, I can go to bed whenever I like, and it turns out what I like is going to bed at 10. Like, that sounds
Yeah,
great.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's quite a fairly recent development in my life. And I think it was, fitness and climbing and stuff like that I discovered. And then for the first time, I found something that it was more important for me to be fresh for and not hungover. I would rather not drink tonight and be fresh for a climbing session tomorrow. So yeah, discovering those things.
As a kind of fellow physically active photographer as well, do you find it helps the work as well? Because I feel like being more connected to myself and my physicality and my movement helps me to photograph things and get into, and I don't know, I just, maybe it's something I'm kidding myself, because I like you would rather wake up fresh faced so I can do a workout the next day. Like, it's the same
hmm
feeling for me, but I feel like it helps me mentally be ready creatively, and then also physically to be ready to move in the way that I want to move.
Yes, absolutely. I think both those things are very true. There is, I mean, it's that sort of same thing we were talking about, the difference between the wide lens and the zoom lens when you're shooting theatre. It is, you can shoot a show from the middle front of the dress circle, and that's your safe spot. You're never going to miss anything there. Um, and it's physically undemanding. You could just sit there with a camera in front of you. But on the other hand, I don't think you're going to get anything that's particularly creative or necessarily very exciting that way. So when I'm shooting a theatre shot, I'm running around the theatre quite a lot. I mean, it's very uh, physical. I usually feel pretty knackered at the end of if it's in a big theatre and I've had to move around a lot. Uh, and yeah, so that's definitely how I work, and that would definitely be challenging for me as I get older if I didn't keep up a sort of a physical fitness regimen.
Yeah, now I'm in my 40s, I think I really appreciate more the things that older people were trying to tell me when I was young
Right?
about,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
about
absolutely.
pacing myself,
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, the difficulty is it's always when I was in my 20s, I knew that these things were true, but you have to somehow make that journey yourself, don't you, just before you feel the actual truth of it and start to live by it.
I think it's a proud human tradition of every generation thinks that they sort of discovered sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and
Yeah, of
and
course.
we need to feel that ownership of it, and then we need to maybe feel how ridiculous that is when we get out the other side of it.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
I accidentally, last weekend when I was talking to Joseph in the US, he floated the idea of, like, he's doing a 30-year time lapse of New York, and he
Right?
floated the idea of, what if you did a 20-year podcast, because he's coming up on year 10. So I think
Oh,
basically what
wow.
he wants is a
Okay.
project buddy, I think, is where this
Yeah.
is headed. But I was like, oh yeah, I could do a 20-year podcast. And it was only later that night I was cooking. I was like, wait a minute, I'll be 65 when this thing finishes
Yeah.
if I do that. And it's like, I don't know. That, on the one hand, that sounds great. But on the other hand, I don't know. Like, How long do we want to be running around with cameras, Tommy? That I think that is a big question.
No, I'm sure I'll always have one somewhere.
Yeah, I think so. Plus, they're only going to get smaller and lighter and better. You know,
Well,
is
absolutely. Yep, yep. Maybe maybe eventually we'll have maybe they'll be in your glasses and you'll be able to activate them
yeah.
uh mentally.
There is one. There is one there already. It's turned off right now so that it doesn't beep. Because I was recording an episode recently and I got a text message on my glasses and it was reading
Ah,
them
right,
to me and
okay.
it got picked up in the microphone. It's funny. The microphones kind of, especially on calls, if you use Teams and stuff for work, they're quite good at isolating speech. And so
Yep,
the microphone goes, that's speech. And so
sure. Yeah.
my colleagues heard a text message from my kids asking if they could play on Xbox. You know, like that was a
Excellent.
thing. So yeah, it's quite funny. So you're on a Z. What is it? The Z6,
Z7 II.
Z7.
I mean, yeah, I think it's great. Yeah, I've had it for a couple of years now. I don't know. It seems to be serving me really well. I don't. I mean, I'll wait until near the time when I'm going to upgrade. But I see that you know, the Z range is expanding all the time.
Yeah. I quite often introduce the show by saying, each week I speak to someone about three lenses that have meant something to them, except when we don't. And so that's kind of like the fun of it. But if you have a few lenses,
I struggle to think of three, but I certainly have two. Um, I mean, obviously, the ones that I mentioned, that are the majority of my professional setup is the 7200 and the 2470. But I'm not very sentimental about those lenses. They very much just do what they do. But lenses that actually that I do sort of feels an almost emotional attachment to are, I think, the 50 mm 1.4. I think that is yeah, I don't think I could live without one of those. And I mean, I just yeah, it's perfect for portraiture, for environmental portraiture, and then low light is where I sort of spent most of my time having fun with cameras, in nightclubs and so on when I was growing up. And the 50 1.4 was just perfect for that. Uh, the other lens that has been important to me is I think the 14 mm 2.8,
ah,
um, which I now don't use because I have a 14 to 24, although it is much bigger than the 14 was. And I first used a 14 2.8 when I was the second shooter on a job in Las Vegas. It was a sort of big corporate event. It was a conference, and uh, so often these sort of vast spaces. Um, and the 14 was invaluable then. And as I say, it was the first time I'd used a lens that wide, and I was just sort of amazed at what you could do with it. But the thing about it is that it's I mean, 95% of the time it's not useful at all. But in those moments when it is, you're so glad that you have it, and the effects that you can get are just absolutely stunning. I think a couple of the most memorable shots I took with a 14 was I was working on I was doing the stills for a music video in Hong Kong, and we were filming this car chase scene, um, or a car was chasing like some skaters, uh, and we were using what I think used to be one of the old runways of an airport, and you had the skyline of Hong Kong over Victoria Harbour in the background, and I was on the film truck that was driving alongside the chase, and I mean, I don't know if I got away with this in the UK health and safety, but I remember sort of hanging off the side, or my arms were looped around the rails, and sort of hanging off the side. And I had this 14 on. The good thing about such a wide angle is that you're going to get a lot less shake, so you can push the shutter speed, to quite a bit slower than you would with another lens. Um, and yeah, just the shots I got of that panning across yeah, definitely some of my favorites. um I can think of another one in a sort of I was in Marrakesh, in the souks in the marketplace, and I'd gone off piece and got a bit lost, so I'd gone quite a bit away from there were no tourists left anymore. um and I'd wandered into the leather market, and it was an auction, and there were just hundreds of men like leafing through these big sheets of leather, like flapping them about and just shouting and bidding on this and that. And it stank, obviously, because of what the process they used to tan it. It was such a visceral experience, and so busy and crowded that we'd have struggled to get much with most lenses, but a 14 just sort of raised overhead, taking in the whole scene was yeah, incredible. So I mean, for photojournalistic purposes and that kind of thing, yeah, it's pretty invaluable.
That sounds amazing. I never go that wide, actually. The widest I've got is 28. But then I'm a tourist, so I'm just here for fun. So I can usually.
Yeah, yeah.
I was joking. I use an M. I was joking with another guest recently about. I just minimum focus distance on an M is usually about 70 centimeters. So
Okay.
the solution to shooting something up close is to put a 90 on and stand back. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the way you
exactly.
do
Yeah.
that, like so the idea of something like that, I'd love to try something like even a 21 or something like that, just to kind of
Right. Yeah.
see, because a lot of what I tend to shoot is, given where we live, it's trees, it's environmental stuff, or it's environmental kind of, it's sort of naturally lit family stuff. And yeah, but that tanning market, that leather market sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what a place.
Yeah. It was quite an experience. I mean, as I say, it's with the 14, it is just most of the time it's not useful because you're just too wide as to be. That you could be taking a photograph of someone on a 14 and they're sort of right in front of you, but their head takes up that much of the
Yeah.
frame. Um, but yeah, there are those rare occasions when everything's so hectic and there's so much going on in a frame that it really pays off to have one.
I guess that's one way you've got to kind of paint with that brush and see what the effect is that you get, and then be
Yeah.
ready for that one time. And then
hmm
you're just next time you're hanging off the back of a truck. Being on a movie set like that's pretty cool though. Were you there for the entire production, or were you just brought in for a section?
Yeah, yeah. So it was 2 weeks that we shot, and some of it was indoors in green screen, and some of it was in sort of warehouses with these quite elaborate sets. But there
Mm.
were 2 or 3 nights like out in the streets of Hong Kong, and that was yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. And it's I remember one time we were shooting and we had to stop for a bit, and there was this sort of meeting between some guys in the street came up, and the producers chatted for a bit, and an envelope was exchanged, and that was the triad getting their cut for filming on their turf. Yes, that's just sort of something that's budgeted for and
Yeah.
expected. Yeah,
God, you gotta pay the local landowner, and that's it. It's just the way
yeah,
it goes.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's much cheaper than stuff disappearing, or
Yeah,
accidents can happen, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite funny. I can't remember where I heard it recently. They were talking about something they filmed. I think it was for The Sopranos. They'd put out an open casting call, and actual mob guys turned up
Wow.
because
Okay.
they wanted to be, and they ended up, I think, out of deference, casting someone, because it was like,
Right.
this guy needs to be in the background. Otherwise, things will go a lot easier. Having said that, it happens in every industry. I did so years ago. There was a photography auction at the MotoGP. So every year at the MotoGP, they have a thing called the Day of Champions, which is where they raise money for charity. So you basically pay all the proceeds for that day go to, I think it's Riders for Health, which is their thing
Mm.
in Africa to get bikes for doctors so they can get out to far-flung places. I bid on that auction to go and hang out with a MotoGP photographer for like a weekend. And when I arrived at Honda's garage on the day, what they didn't say to me was how kind of on a knife edge actually my being allowed to do it was. So I
Okay.
turned up with Andrew, the photographer, he'd shot the MotoGP for like 15 years at this point, something like that. And we turned up, and the boss of Honda motorcycles of the HMRC team was sat there having a chat, and he was quite a big Japanese guy, and they explained who I was, and Andrew sort of you saw everyone's body language change. It was really funny. It was like, clearly this person has to say yes and be in the right mood, otherwise
Yeah.
this whole thing is actually off and it's not happening. And so he
Yeah.
was just
Yeah.
sat, and he didn't, in the kind of the stereotype of this in the movie or whatever, like, he didn't even look up. His eyes were practically closed. He was just like, and he's sort of, there was a very kind of grunted hi, and that was it. And then it was,
Wow. Okay.
and then
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
allowed on that side of the garage, But yeah, very touch and go. So I think everyone has their gatekeepers, whether they're
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
legally, legally or not. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was very much his house that I was being allowed to come into. It was really cool. Cool experience. Well, thank you so much for giving me an hour and getting to chat to you. I'm so glad we've actually talked.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks very much.
I will definitely hit you up next time I'm down in Glasgow if you're about. It'd be lovely to kind
Yeah,
of
please do, for
grab
sure.
a coffee or something. For people listening who would like to come and find some of your work, where can they find you?
I would say the best place is Instagram, where my handle is TGKWAN. And then my sort of portfolio photography is on my website, which is www.tommygakenwan.com.
Fantastic. Brilliant. What are you doing the rest of the day? You doing any editing? Anything fun?
No, I've sort of got it out of the way. So today I am gonna go and well, this evening it's a friend's birthday, so we're going out for dinner for his birthday, and then we're gonna go and see a show at theatre.
Lovely.
Yeah,
Very nice.
yeah,
Cool.
looking forward to it.
Well, have an amazing rest of the day, mate. It was really, really lovely to see you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Likewise.
No,
Bye bye.
take care. Bye. Thanks again to Tommy for taking the time to be on the show and for being my 52nd guest. It felt only appropriate that the final guest of year one was from Scotland, and I was really, really pleased that Tommy said yes. If you liked the show, then don't forget that you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, all the musics. You can also subscribe to the weekly newsletter that goes out every Wednesday, and it's available from ianfarrell.com/sign-up. There is a link to that in the show notes. Well, that's it. We've done it. We've done a whole year. 1 year in the bag. And next week, to celebrate that, it seemed appropriate to get back guest number one, Danny Bly, to come back and reflect with me on the show and lens choices and some changes he's made to his gear. So come out next week and we'll have a Daniversary episode. Daniversary, that's great. No? Okay. I might get kicked out of podcast club for saying that. Anyway, I'm going to worry about that. Have an amazing week, and I'll see you next time.